From the outside, the Anderson family appeared to have everything: wealth, success, and a beautiful home in an upscale neighborhood. David Anderson, a successful businessman, had recently married Sarah, a high-powered lawyer with a reputation for being tough as nails. They each brought a child into the marriage: David's son, Ryan, and Sarah's daughter, Lily. On paper, they were the perfect blended family. But beneath the surface, a dark and twisted relationship was brewing, one that would ultimately lead to unimaginable tragedy. Ryan, 18, was the epitome of the all-American boy: tall, athletic, and effortlessly charming. He was the star of his high school football team, with a promising future that everyone seemed to talk about. But behind his confident exterior, Ryan harbored a deep-seated loneliness that no amount of accolades could fill. His father, David, was distant, more focused on his career and new marriage than on his son's emotional needs. Ryan had grown accustomed to hiding his feelings, masking his insecurities with bravado and the attention of girls who found his brooding nature irresistible. Lily, a year younger, was Ryan's opposite in almost every way. She was quiet, bookish, and introverted, often retreating into the world of literature and art. She had always felt like an outsider, even before her mother remarried. The death of her biological father had left a void in her life, one that no amount of academic success could fill. When Sarah married David, Lily's life was turned upside down. She was forced to move into a new home, attend a new school, and adapt to a new family dynamic that she found stifling and alienating. At first, Ryan and Lily treated each other with the polite indifference typical of new step-siblings. They lived under the same roof, exchanged pleasantries when necessary, and generally stayed out of each other's way. But as time passed, something began to shift. Ryan started to notice the quiet girl who always seemed lost in thought, the girl who never quite fit in with the crowd. Lily, in turn, found herself drawn to Ryan's confidence, his magnetic presence that seemed to command attention wherever he went. Their interactions grew more frequent, more charged. What began as fleeting glances across the dinner table turned into lingering looks and subtle touches. They started spending more time together, finding excuses to be alone. It was during these moments that they discovered a connection neither had expected, a bond that felt both thrilling and dangerous. Their relationship quickly escalated from innocent flirtation to something much darker. The secrecy of their affair only fueled their obsession with each other. They would meet in the basement late at night, the only place in the house where they felt safe from prying eyes. The basement became their sanctuary, a place where they could indulge in their forbidden desires without fear of discovery. The darkness of the room mirrored the darkness growing within them, a darkness that neither could escape. As their love affair deepened, so did their paranoia. The constant fear of being caught by their parents, the guilt of their incestuous relationship, began to eat away at them. They became more secretive, more distrustful of everyone around them. They started to see their parents not as protectors, but as obstacles to their happiness. The more they obsessed over their future together, the more the idea of eliminating those obstacles took root. It started as a whisper, a dark joke shared in the dead of night. "What if they weren't here anymore?" Ryan had said one evening, his voice barely above a whisper as they lay tangled in each other's arms. Lily had laughed it off at first, but the seed had been planted. The more they talked about it, the more it began to make sense. Without their parents, they could be together without fear, without judgment. The fantasy of a life free from the constraints of their family began to consume them, until it no longer felt like a fantasy at all. They began to plan. The initial idea was to kill their parents in their sleep, making it look like a robbery gone wrong. They discussed every detail, rehearsing it over and over until it felt like a script they had memorized. But when the moment of truth arrived, they found themselves unable to go through with it. Standing over their sleeping parents with weapons in hand, the reality of murder paralyzed them. The fear of crossing that final line, of actually taking a life, was too much. But the darkness within them wouldn't be silenced. They couldn't simply return to their old lives, not after what they had planned. So they chose a different path: kidnapping. They decided to bind and gag David and Sarah, to hold them captive in the basement, the very place that had become the sanctuary of their twisted love. On the night they chose to execute their plan, the tension in the house was unbearable. David and Sarah had just returned from a dinner party, slightly drunk and in high spirits, completely unaware of the storm brewing under their roof. Ryan and Lily waited in their rooms, their hearts racing with a mixture of anticipation and dread. As soon as the house was silent, they moved into action. Ryan approached his father's room first, the weight of the rope heavy in his hands. He entered quietly, his footsteps barely making a sound on the carpeted floor. David was sound asleep, his breathing slow and steady. Ryan stood over him for a moment, his mind racing with thoughts of what he was about to do. But the thought of Lily, of their future together, steeled his resolve. He moved quickly, looping the rope around his father's wrists and ankles, tightening the knots with practiced precision. David stirred slightly but didn't wake, his intoxicated state keeping him in a deep sleep. Lily, meanwhile, was doing the same in her mother's room. She had taken a roll of duct tape from the garage earlier that day, hiding it under her bed until the time came. Her hands trembled as she approached Sarah, the tape feeling cold and sticky against her fingers. She hesitated for a moment, a fleeting sense of guilt washing over her. But then she remembered Ryan's words, the promises they had made to each other, and she pressed on. She carefully bound Sarah's wrists and ankles, then placed a strip of tape over her mouth to keep her silent. With their parents secured, Ryan and Lily dragged them into the basement, the darkness swallowing them whole. The basement, once a place of secret passion, had now become a prison. They tied their parents to chairs, making sure the knots were tight enough to hold, but not so tight as to cause immediate pain. They wanted to keep them alive, to make them understand why they had done this. But as they stared down at their bound and gagged parents, the reality of what they had done began to sink in. The adrenaline that had fueled their actions was quickly replaced by a suffocating sense of dread and confusion. They had no plan beyond this, no idea of what to do next. The gravity of their actions weighed heavily on them, and for the first time they felt the cold grip of panic. David was the first to wake. His eyes fluttered open, his mind groggy from the alcohol. It took him a moment to register where he was, the sight of his bound wrists sending a shock of terror through him. He struggled against the ropes, his movements frantic as he tried to free himself. When he realized he couldn't break the bonds, he looked up, his eyes landing on Ryan and Lily. His heart broke at the sight of his son, standing there with a mixture of fear and defiance in his eyes. "Ryan," he tried to say, but the gag muffled his words. "What are you doing?" Ryan said nothing, his eyes darting between his father and Lily. He could see the confusion in his father's eyes, the betrayal. A part of him wanted to untie him, to end this nightmare before it went any further. But then he thought of Lily, of the promises they had made, and he steeled himself. Lily was less composed. She stood trembling, her hands shaking as she watched her mother wake up. Sarah's eyes went wide with fear as she realized she was bound, her muffled cries echoing through the basement. Lily could feel the panic rising in her chest, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it would burst. The basement, once a place of comfort, now felt like a tomb. The walls seemed to close in on them, the darkness pressing down like a suffocating blanket. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. David, ever resourceful, began to work furiously on the ropes binding his wrists. He could feel the knots loosening, the adrenaline in his veins giving him the strength he needed. He motioned to Sarah to stay silent, his eyes filled with determination. He knew that if he could free himself, he could get them out of this alive. Ryan and Lily were too wrapped up in their own panic to notice what David was doing. They argued in hushed tones, their voices trembling as they debated what to do next. Every option seemed more terrifying than the last. They began to turn on each other, the stress of the situation eroding the bond they had once thought unbreakable. Finally, with a burst of strength, David freed his wrists. He didn't hesitate. He bolted up the stairs, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound of footsteps racing up the stairs jolted Ryan and Lily out of their heated exchange. Realizing what had happened, Ryan's face contorted with fury. He sprinted after his father, but David was already out the door, running into the night, yelling for help at the top of his lungs. The carefully constructed plan had completely unraveled, leaving Ryan and Lily with no options and no escape. Lily collapsed onto the floor, overwhelmed by the horror of the situation. Ryan, consumed by rage and fear, stared down at her with wild eyes. "This is your fault," he screamed. "We could have been free. We could have had everything." But even as he said the words, the truth began to seep into his mind. There was no way out. Their lives were over, and there was no future for them. Not together, not apart. The police would be there soon, and when they arrived, their forbidden love would be exposed to the world, their lives dissected by the media and the public. The shame, the fear, and the inevitability of their situation crushed Ryan's will to fight any longer. Desperation led to a final, horrifying decision. Ryan's eyes filled with a cold resolve as he looked at Lily. "If we can't be together in this world, then we'll be together in the next." Lily's tear-streaked face twisted in confusion, but before she could react, Ryan lunged at her. In one swift, brutal motion, Ryan wrapped his hands around Lily's neck, squeezing with all the strength he had left. Lily struggled, her hands clawing at his arms, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. But Ryan was relentless, driven by a twisted belief that this was the only way to preserve their love, to escape the nightmare their lives had become. Slowly, Lily's struggles weakened, her breath coming in shorter gasps, until finally she went limp in his arms. Ryan released her, his body trembling as he stared down at what he had done. Lily's lifeless body lay crumpled on the floor, a tragic testament to the love that had destroyed them both. He sank to his knees beside her, his mind fractured by the horror of his actions. The sound of sirens grew louder, the flashing lights of police cars reflecting off the walls as they pulled up outside. Ryan knew there was no escape, no redemption for what he had done. With trembling hands, he took the knife they had originally planned to use on their parents. He glanced one last time at Lily, now free from the pain and turmoil that had consumed their lives. In a final act of despair, Ryan plunged the knife into his own chest, the pain sharp and immediate. As his vision blurred, he collapsed next to Lily, their bodies entwined in death as they had longed to be in life. When the police finally entered the house, they found a scene of unimaginable tragedy. A father and mother frantic with fear, their children lying dead in the basement, victims of their own twisted love. The media would later portray it as a modern-day Romeo and Juliet, but those who knew the family understood that this was a story of obsession, of love turned deadly, of lives destroyed by a passion that could never be fulfilled. In the end, the Anderson family was left shattered, their home now a symbol of the darkest sides of human emotion. And as the world moved on, the memory of Ryan and Lily lingered, a haunting reminder of what can happen when love is twisted into something unrecognizable, something deadly. The tragic story of Ryan and Lily serves as a chilling reminder of how love, when twisted by obsession, can lead to unimaginable consequences. If you found this tale gripping, make sure to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more intense and shocking stories. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more tales that delve into the darkest corners of the human psyche.